Flashy girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.
Welcome back, everybody, to Oh, Mr. Sheffield, a podcast about the 90s hit sitcom The Nanny, starring Fran Drescher. But the podcast stars me and my co-host,
Toria Sheffield.
That's right. And I am Sean DiPasquale. We are back with season 3, episode 24, The Cantor Show. Mm-hmm. I love this episode. But also, Toria, we have a special guest this week.
We do. We have Aryeh Cohen-Wade on, who is the host of the podcast Culturally Determined, among other things, which we guested on. Now it will be a few months back. Many months back, probably, when this airs. But Aryeh, welcome to the podcast. Would you please introduce yourself?
Hi, guys. Thanks so much for having me. So, yes, I am a podcast host, a show called Culturally Determined, and I am a former coworker of Toria's. Mm-hmm. And I watched The Nanny when it was on TV originally, and then didn't think about it much, for the following 25 or so years, until I had you guys on my podcast to talk about your show and The Nanny and associated topics.
Mm-hmm.
That's right, folks. This is the quid pro quo episode of Oh, Mr. Sheffield, wherein we are graciously asked to be on someone else's show, and then we corner them into being on our show in return and force them to watch an episode of The Nanny. And that's how you make new Nanny fans.
You gotta get them one at a time.
That's right. It's a long process.
It's God's work. And so this episode, The Cantor Show, just to anchor us, it is the episode where Fran starts dating a cantor who then gets asked to be in one of Mr. Sheffield's productions. But I also just wanted to read the first couple sentences from the IMDb synopsis, because it just made me laugh, because when I took a step back from the episode and then read the synopsis, I just went this is so batshit. So this is what it says. It goes, Fran starts dating Gary Isaac, the handsome new cantor at Sylvia's temple, on a chance meeting with Burt Bacharach at the Sheffield household, at which Gary wows Bacharach with his singing. Maxwell and Cece hire Gary as a performer for their new Bacharach-penned musical. And
yes, this was the most incredulous aspect of this episode to me as well. Even in just taking my notes, was the scene where they're like, hey, it's Burt Bacharach. And then they're like, oh, hey, here's a cantor. And he sings and he dips Nanny. And then Burt Bacharach goes, I want to hire him. And they go, you're in our show. And I went, what?
Well, we'll get there.
That's not how any of that works.
But also, I will say, Sean, you and I talked about this briefly before we started recording. I was very pleased at how both Jewy and musical theater oriented this episode was, because we talked a lot about that when we were on Aryeh's podcast, and I was like, man, how humiliating would it be if we had him on for an episode that just contradicted everything we said about this show?
I mean, full disclosure, we picked this I went through and we were like, well, because you were originally like, all right, I guess we'll have him on and in whatever episode we're doing. And I was like, yeah. And then it occurred to me we record these in advance. We could just pick any episode. We don't have to force him to watch some random one. Let's pick one that will be relevant. And so I read the description for the show, and I was like, oh yeah, this would be great. 3 Jews talking about the most Jewy episode of the most Jewish show on television.
This is one of the Jewiest pieces of culture I've absorbed in years. I was shocked at how Jewy this episode was that it aired on television.
And I'm gonna reference, and Tori's already referenced our conversation that we had. So if you are listening to this episode and you haven't listened to Culturally Determined episode that we were on, go back and listen, because we're probably going to reference, topics that we brought up there. And one of the things is how, the reason this show, and I've talked about it here too, the reason it meant so much to me, I think, as a kid, is because I had never seen such displays of Jewishness normalized on television before. And it was it felt very much I am being seen right now,
And quick question. Okay, I Googled this. Does anybody, I don't know the answer. The Cantor Show, what is that in reference to? Is that wordplay on another?
Was there ever something called the Eddie Cantor Show?
Maybe. I don't know.
I literally Googled what is the Cantor show the nanny a reference to, and nothing came out.
They didn't have anything in IMDb trivia.
The Eddie Cantor show.
Yeah, they do. The Eddie Cantor Comedy Theater references from the same title. So yeah, the Cantor show is the Eddie. Yeah.
I mean, Eddie Cantor is just a name I know. I think he was sort of an Ed Sullivan type guy, but maybe more of a Borscht Belt comedian from like the 50s. But I don't know.
You should have just checked IMDb trivia.
No, it wasn't.
It's there. I just looked at it.
Fine.
Or no, connections. Sorry, not trivia.
Okay. Well,
connection.
we figured it out. We came full circle. We figured it out.
We got it.
Okay. So
so walk us through.
Okay. So we start this episode out with Fran and Niles in the kitchen, and we establish that Fran is headed to Friday night services, and she's really dressed up. She's like looking her best because apparently there's a new young single cantor at the temple. Yeah. And for anyone listening,
I guess we should stop and explain what a cantor is.
Yes.
Which the show does not do, right?
No, that's what I mean. This show was like, hey, these people are Jewish. This is Jewish life. Get in or get out. And like, you'll figure it out from context clues. Because they never slow down to be like, what's a cantor? Well, the cantor is, they show you what he does. Show don't tell, right? Like they bring you into the temple and we see the cantor is like singing so basically temples have a rabbi and then they have a cantor. And it's usually the cantor will sing all of the Hebrew prayers and this stuff. And the rabbi leads the service and reads the Torah. And sometimes you get a singing rabbi, but usually not.
Well, the cantor leads the congregation in song.
Yeah.
A cantor is sort of like the choir leader at a church, but many, at least conservative temples, don't have a choir. The entire audience will sing. So the cantor leads that, but also is an important role within the temple, and it's like a full-time job and often helps the bar and bat mitzvah boys and girls learn their portions and stuff. So it's an important role within a synagogue.
Mm-hmm. And so, Fran says that there's this young single cantor at her mom's temple. And she goes, and I'm bringing Maggie and Gracie because I think, I want to teach them how other cultures pick up men. And then we also establish in this scene that Fran has lost some luggage with an airline, and she's going to claim that she had a $500 watch in there because
$500 watch.
Yeah, because then she will get the $500 insurance. So she's pulling a little scam under the encouragement of Niles.
A classic con.
Yep. And so we cut to the next scene.
Can we just say in this scene, it is the temple scene, Gracie's shawl.
Yes.
so
because before they leave to go to temple, Gracie
the little girl comes out wearing sort of a babushka costume, or was more maybe looking like a child gypsy from costume or something.
She looks like a young Yentl. They went with a real Fiddler on the Roof, Yentl, Sunrise Sunset look. She looks like an old Jewish grandma.
Well, and she very proudly goes, Fran, I'm ready for temple. And then Fran goes, honey, it's only Friday night services. We're not fleeting Anatevka, which is from Fiddler on the Roof.
From Fiddler, yeah.
Yeah.
So it was great. And then by contrast, can we just say Maggie looks the most goyim of all goyims that I've ever seen. Like, they cut to a shot of her in the temple, and I was like, oh my goodness. Like, oy vey.
Just she's a little waspy heiress at temple. But we go to temple and we cut right to Cantor Gary singing. And I have this note, I'm like, they really let him go a bit. Like he's singing, and all the audience, especially the women, are riveted.
And I don't know what exact prayer he was doing, but he was singing real Hebrew. I guess they wouldn't have given him nonsense words to sing or something, but I assume he was doing actual prayer.
Bagel and cream cheese and lox and
yeah, no, it was legit, guys. Listeners, it was legit. But so anyway, he finishes.
Wait, but then the thing that made me, the first thing, sort of belly laugh I had was when he finishes and the entire audience launches into applause, which is not something that happened at any temple I've ever been in. So it's not like a concert.
No.
So that was a little, that was a false note for me, at least.
Yes. Yes, and it was a heightened reality for sure. But part of this is that there's that thing that sound again. But
I heard it too. Yes.
Yeah. Part of what this is establishing is that like all the young single women in Temple are really there to try to make an impression on this like handsome single guy. So they all beeline for the front of the
and that rang
synagogue.
very accurate for me.
Really? I was too little to pick up on any of that.
Yeah.
But so it will literally, Fran like pushes a couple girls out of the way to be first in line. And at one point, she says something like, oh yeah, I haven't gone to temple regularly or since I was in Hebrew school. She says something like that. And her mom goes, oh yeah, like what? That was about 10 years ago. Or maybe Fran even goes, yeah, that was about 10 years ago. And then another mom goes, 10 years ago, you were babysitting my daughter. And then Sylvia goes, you're lucky we're in temple, Sarah. It was like a very well delivered line. Like she would get physical with this woman.
She's fantastic.
Yeah.
She's so good. Every line she delivers is on fire. And that was my first belly laugh of the episode.
Yeah.
Temple.
and then Fran casually drops that she works for a Broadway producer, and that she. Can
not casually.
Yes, well, she very intentionally drops it, and she's like, I can get you and your wife tickets anytime. And then he's like, oh, I'm not married. And, she and Sylvia are like, oh, really? But like very obviously knew that. And he's like, but I do love the theater. So like we should go together sometime. And so we kind of, that kicks off this little romance. And I'm glazing over a few things just because I have a feeling we're going to go long if I don't. But so then we cut back to the mansion. And we find Burt Bacharach, the one and only.
The one and only, which we chatted very briefly before we started recording, and we all realized that all three of us knew who this was, recognized him on sight, then couldn't figure out why we knew that. And then all remembered it was probably because of Austin Powers.
Yes. Our first introduction to this, creative genius.
But we should say he's a composer first and foremost, right? Which is even weirder why we know him, because he was never really a performer. That was like a Mike Myers dragging him into the spotlight kind of thing. But he's a composer, and he made this song "Say a Little Prayer," which they play in this episode, which everybody knows from My Best Friend's Wedding? What movie is that? Say a little prayer for you. Or is that? Oh. Is it Sister Act? It might be Sister Act.
No, it's not. It's maybe it would make sense. No, I think you're right. It is My Best Friend's Wedding. Yeah.
Yeah, where they all start singing it at the end. Yes. He also did What the World Needs Now is Love. What the world needs now is love, sweet love, right? He did I'll Never Fall in Love Again, which is what they do in Austin Powers. He wrote Raindrops Keep Falling on My Head. This guy
he's
not messing around.
Formidable talent.
Theme from Arthur.
He is sitting at the Sheffield's piano playing as Mr. Sheffield, Cece, and Niles are listening.
Yes.
And he finishes the song and like the studio audience like goes crazy, and he gets a big like round of applause.
This is such a 90s moment for me. I just feel like this doesn't happen. I don't know if it happened in the 80s or 70s. It definitely doesn't happen on TV now. There's so few like sitcoms filmed before live studio audiences, but it's just like, there's no reality to this whatsoever, and it's Mr. Sheffield is almost like, ladies and gentlemen, Mr. Burt Bacharach, like it's just like this is like a variety show or something, and you have this guy singing and the audience is like, yes, we all love Burt Bacharach, and we're just going wild for him.
Well, here's the thing though, the biggest fans of The Nanny probably, there's a lot of musical theater, a lot of theater people who watch this. They might have,
these audiences we've seen on this show, Toria, these audiences pop for like Andrew Lloyd Webber in the same way, and like soap opera actors. So like, I feel like Burt Bacharach is like not a stretch that these people were like, oh my God, we're on the Burt Bacharach audience.
And I did say this, even though I had no idea who Burt Bacharach was when I first watched Austin Powers, I remember my dad perking up and being like, oh, like, like I guess to an older generation, maybe he was a a bigger commodity. But then it made me laugh because then Cece instantly puts her foot in her mouth and she goes, "That was incredible. And imagine how good it will sound when we get someone who can sing."
Yes.
And then she like kind of like backtracks and goes, "I mean, sings as well as you," which was a classic Cece moment. And we also have a really funny bit too, where and I actually thought Bert was great, and in this little bit that he was expected to do, where Mr. Sheffield goes, "Oh, this is wonderful." And the last person to play this piano was Marvin Hamlish, which, by the way, REA is true. He was the last person on the show to play that piano several episodes back. And then Bert goes, "You're going to do a show with Marvin Hamlish," like very like interested and annoyed, and then curious and not annoyed. That's the wrong word. The
piano joke is also like a bit of a meta joke for the show too, right? Because it's like they have this beautiful piano in their house, and they only ever use it when there's a guest on the show.
Yes, that's true.
We've never seen, I don't think, anyone play this piano except for like a guest.
Yeah, I mean, it's literally Marvin Hamlish and Napper Becker. But he's like, "You're going to do a show with Marvin Hamlish?" And then Mr. Sheffield's like, no, I mean, it was a social thing. And he's like, "Oh, you had a party for Marvin?" And then he's like, no, I mean, it was an awards thing. And he goes, "Marvin got another award." I really was like, oh, Burt Bacharach's a good sport. Like, of what little I know about him, like, I like him even more now.
So, all right. So then Fran and the Cantor come in, right?
Cantor Gary, yeah.
And Cantor Gary starts singing immediately almost. Like there's like brief introductions, but like in the interest of moving things along, like he starts singing and he like lays it on thick. He like spins Fran and he dips her and he does a whole number.
Well, because he's like, "Oh, Mr. Bacharach, I love your music. I sing it in temple sometimes." Then he just goes into song, and then Burt Bacharach just instantly starts accompanying him on the piano. And
then this is the like probably of all the unbelievable things that happened in this episode, this was the most forced. And Toria, this was like one of your pet peeves of this show sometimes, where they'll just make a thing happen so that an episode happens. And this was one of those things where like immediately after this, Burt Bacharach turns to Cece and Mr. Sheffield and he goes, "I want that guy in the show." And they go, "Okay." Like there's no discussion. There's no like, "Well, wait, what? Who is this guy? He's the cantor at a temple." They just go, "All right." And then they're like, "Hey, do you want to be in our show?" And he goes, "Yes." And then they're like, "Okay, well, you're a cantor." And he's like, "Actually, here, take my agent's card." And we get this like joke that he like already has like an agent at William Morris. And it's just, it happens so quickly.
Well, the pace of the whole show, as someone who has not watched Any Nanny in 25 years, is extremely quick. And like Fran meeting the cantor to the next scene, they're already dating. Mm-hmm. That happens extremely quickly. And by the like middle towards end of the episode, she's expecting an engagement ring. Like this happened within about 15 minutes. I assume this is sort of like the tone of the show, but I was surprised by just what a breakneck pace it was. And
also that's very indicative of just Fran's thirst for getting proposed to as well.
Which leads us to the next scene, right? Is where we're at a party at Sylvia's house and the rabbi is there and the cantor is there. And there's this, we get a very funny half appearance of Fran's father who we've never seen before on the show. Yes. So they do this beat where she's like, "Maury," and then we see his toupee fall off his right, Morty.
So is that an established thing in the show, like the name, like Wilson on Home Improvement, that you never fully see the dad, or you had never seen him before at all?
We've never seen him at all before. Okay. He's always in the other room on the toilet or watching TV. and this was the first time where we get a glimpse. We get his feet and his hands and his toupee falling off of his head. Because he bends down to pick up his toupee.
I like that beat a lot.
Me too.
Well, and the really important thing with this scene is, we think it's going to be a small, intimate dinner at Sylvia's house. And it turns out like the whole community is there because now that Fran is dating the popular cantor, Sylvia is like, the belle of the ball. Everyone wants to be her friend. And so everyone's there, including like the rabbi. And at one point, Cantor Gary, he goes, "Everybody, I have an announcement to make." And it does seem like he's going to propose to Fran, right?
Sylvia goes like, oh, like, and then he announces instead that he's leaving the temple for a career on Broadway. And there's a moment, everyone reacts, but my favorite beat is there's a moment where you just hear some woman off camera go, "This is all Sylvia's fault."
Yes.
Which, like, I get that the show's not Sylvia's show, but I wish the rest of the episode had been about Sylvia being so stressed out that everyone hates her now.
Well, yeah, but the thing is, he sets it up in a way where he's like, being a Cantor has been the most rewarding thing in my life until I met you, Fran. And then that's why they're all like leaning in, waiting for it. And then he's like, which is why I'm leaving the temple. So to pursue my new career on Broadway. But yeah, so it's huge drama. And then we cut to a few weeks later.
Well, but you're leaving out the part of the decrepit rabbi spilling his food everywhere, which I thought was funny.
He spills the gravy boat. There's a beat right before this where Sylvia goes, "Morty, take the gravy boat away from the rabbi," and then like. And she just yells that like randomly in the middle of the scene off screen to Morty. And then the Cantor makes his announcement. And then you see the rabbi go, "Whoa," and he just spills the whole gravy boat over.
Yeah, well, because it's just this silly gag that this old rabbi is spilling things all over Sylvia's home on the very evening that she finally took the plastic off of all her furniture because it was such a special night. Just a silly little gag that was.
It's great. This
enjoyable.
This episode was this show firing on all cylinders, as evidenced by how much there is to talk about in an episode that, like, plot wise was like as thin as any other. There's just so much. It's great.
Well,
it's great.
and we cut to what I imagine is a week or two later. Yeah. Gary's in the Sheffield living room practicing a song with a pianist. And again, they really let him sing for a while. Like, they waste some sweet, airtime on just this guy singing. And, Mr. Sheffield literally says, like, "Oh, Gary, like, you're such a talent. I wish I could give you a bigger part in this show." And no sooner does he say that, does Cece come rushing in, and she's like, she doesn't call Mr. Sheffield. She's like, "Maxwell," she's like, "Our worst nightmare has happened."
No. Hold on. Because this is it. This is the fantastic CeCe Niles moment. She comes in, barreling in, and she screams, "Maxwell, it's your worst nightmare." And Niles goes, "Oh, will you stop announcing yourself? I'll be out of a job."
Yes, and he just walks right out. Well, because I was going to say, Niles got a little underselled, I think, in the first scene in this episode because he couldn't. They used him. I noticed in that first scene where Fran's leaving for Temple is just really like the guy who's setting up jokes for Fran to knock down, and that's like really underutilizing him. But he picks up steam as this episode goes. But so
does he always? So like 3 times this episode, he delivers a joke and then walks off.
Yes.
Camera. Is that what he always does? I thought that was so funny. It's like showmanship from Seinfeld, where like he delivers a joke, he's out of there. Like,
yeah, I guess that's what he does.
That allows the laughter or applause break. But like, he's not hanging around and mugging. He's like going off and doing something else.
Not, because he's supposed to be doing butler stuff. So often his jokes come as like he'll be like dusting a shelf.
He's like polishing a piece of silver.
Yes. Yeah. He'll say a slammer and then he'll be like, "I'm done with this silverware," and he'll walk into the other room. Like.
Yes, it's a very dignified way to deliver your jokes. But so Cece comes rushing in, and then Niles
gets his banger,
gets a good dig in, and then she's like, "The lead of our show has gotten hit by a bus," and
which also is like, I wrote, "Wow, we need some time to unpack that," and they didn't give us any because,
but they did because they make a joke of it where Mr. Sheffield's like, "Oh God," like he stands up and he's like, "Well, I guess we're going to have to, use the understudy." And then Cece goes, "Maxwell, aren't you going to even ask how he is?" And Mr. Sheffield's like, oh, right, of course. Like, how is he? And then she goes, the understudy stinks. It was just like, she's so great in these moments. And they set it up in a way where I didn't fully see that beat coming.
Same.
Like I like that when that happens. And she delivered it in a way where I was just like, oh man, she's really good when she's good.
Her delivery on that was really, really good.
And like a character you haven't met getting hit by a bus is another sort of like 90s sitcom thing that I guess they stopped you. It just became a cliche, or just getting hit by the idea of getting hit by a bus in general, maybe a sort of fallen off. But but that just seemed like it happened a lot more back then.
Interrompemos esse podcast para perguntar: quem você quer ser?
Designer, engenheira,
pedagoga,
administrador.
Quer saber? O Senac EAD é nota máxima no MEC. Tem cursos de diversas áreas, com conteúdo elaborado por especialistas do mercado e professores mestres e doutores. Ainda tem o Senac Carreiras, conectando estudantes a vagas de emprego em todo o país. Saiba mais em ead.senac.br/graduação.
Chegou a melhor parte do podcast. É hora de provar a melhor Coca-Cola. A Coca-Cola sem açúcar. O sabor irresistível da Coca-Cola, sem açúcar e igualmente refrescante. Coca-Cola sem açúcar. A melhor escolha.
Just they got hit by a bus.
I feel like getting hit by a bus peaked with Final Destination. That was really pinnacle hit by a bus. So good on you, Devin Sawa.
Sean, you're on the record. Sounds like the hill you're going to die on.
I will. Don't argue with me. We don't have time. All right.
But so then, just as they are like, oh God, like we've the understudy stinks. They hear Gary in the background, who's been like diligently singing and practicing this whole time while this conversation has been happening. And then Mr. Sheffield's just like, Cece, are you thinking what I'm thinking? And I don't know if you know this because you're not a usual nanny watcher, but Cece's obviously like desperately in love with Mr. Sheffield, and he has no idea that she exists outside of their business partnership. And so she's just like, that life is short and we should just go upstairs. And then he goes, hire Gary. And then she like pauses and she's like, hire Gary. Kinky. Oh, you mean for the show? She was like definitely considering.
Yeah, she was considering it.
Yeah, oh my God, CC cracks me up. And so this, is this big moment that, they give Gary the lead role in their Broadway show. And so in the next scene, this is happening like at the same time. Fran and Sylvia come into the Sheffield's kitchen, and Sylvia is like, she's got like a scarf around her head and like big sunglasses on, and she's just basically trying to be incognito because she's like currently the shame of her community, and she's like, if anybody sees me, they're going to give me the evil eye. And she's basically like, Fran, like you have to convince Mr. Sheffield to like fire Gary so that he'll come back and be the Cantor. Like that, everybody hates me. The temple's like going to fail without him, which is a little strange considering he's like just the new Cantor, but whatever. And then Fran's like, she's like, I can't tell Mr. Sheffield how to run his life. But then Gary and Mr. Sheffield enter, and Gary announces, he's going to be the star of the musical now, not just like, a second tier cast member. And so at first Fran tries to like do her mother's bidding. But then Mr. Sheffield's like, well, I mean, Gary's going to be huge. Like he's going to be so rich and so famous. And then Fran's like, okay, never mind. Actually, he's going to stay in the show bomb. And Sylvia's like, she essentially then insinuates that God will punish them for taking the Cantor away from the temple.
Did you get the beat where she talks to the kids yet though? Or do we skip
I blew past it because we're just so much.
I'll save it for favorite lines because I love that beat. Okay.
But so basically, she's just, because Fran's like, sorry, Mom, it's 2 against 1. And Sylvia's like, it's not 2 against 1. She's like, because I have a higher power on my side. And then she like turns to leave and she just like lowers her sunglasses and she's like, and ours is not a merciful God. She leaves and did you hear there's like a ha.
Yeah. Which again, from my experience growing up in a Jewish household, tracks.
I mean, this development in the plot of like, a higher power, it suddenly is intercessing in reality is also like, there were just so many things in this episode where I was like, you just don't see this on TV anymore. That like suddenly God is like sending like it's biblical plagues because of this one Piggy-Yoon event.
As soon as this happens, she finds a locust.
Yes, it's raining for a week, and I mean this God exists within the universe of the nanny, this ancient question of whether God is real or not.
Jewish
in the universe, there is the Old Testament God exists and intercedes in everyday life to affect events. So that's really something.
To good New York Jewish women, he does, which also, by my experience, tracks.
Well, I was thinking, this is kind of interesting that this is probably a lot of America's first real exposure to Judaism. And this is the portrayal, almost Sylvie has cast a curse on. But so
she does bring up the evil eye in an earlier part of the episode.
Yeah. Well, okay. So we cut to a week later, and as you guys said, he's been, it's been raining for 7 days and 7 nights, and at first she's like, oh, maybe my mom was right about this, but then Mr. Sheffield comes running in, and he's got these the pre-review, whatever it's called. I forget what it's called, but it's basically what is it called before? Advanced review. That's it.
Advanced review
of the new show, and they're raving, and they're like, "Oh yes, Maxwell Sheffield has a certified hit on his hands with this, Gary Isaacs and blah blah blah," and he's just so excited, and it seems like everything's going to be great until then. Gary comes in, enters, and he announces that he's actually been cast in Andrew Lloyd Webber's Evita, the movie. So he is going to be pulling out of the show for this bigger opportunity. And literally, no sooner does he say that, does ominous thunder ring out. And at first, Mr. Sheffield at least pretends to congratulate him and is like, okay, this is a great opportunity for you. Good luck. And Gary, the way he doesn't even really break up with Fran. He's just basically like, thanks, Fran. All my life, all I thought about was just, getting married and settling down. But then I met you and you changed all that. and so he leaves. And we find out that Mr. Sheffield's so calm because he's like, oh, he's not going anywhere. Gary has an ironclad contract. At which point Cece walks in and she's like, was that Gary getting into a limo? And she's like, it's no big deal. I'll have him sign his contract tomorrow. and my favorite part of this whole scene is, at first, so then she leaves and goes into the kitchen, and Mr. Sheffield stands up, and as usual, he screams at Fran and blames her for something that couldn't possibly have been anticipated by her. It is not her fault.
No, it's Cece's fault.
Yeah, and then he's like, of course, you get involved in my life, and everything, goes to hell. And he's like, but I'll get to you later. And then he goes, I have to go bludgeon Cece with a Tony, and he runs out. But I just like the idea that he would threaten to beat a woman with a Tony, just casually.
He also, when he's celebrating the future success, he's smoking one of the biggest cigars I've ever seen in my life. It's a foot long. It's incredible.
There's also a great beat where the Cantor comes in and he's like, I'm leaving to go, I'm going to film a part in a movie. And then he's like, Maxwell's like, oh, okay, cool. And then he goes, it's a part in an Andrew Lloyd Webber's Evita. And Maxwell goes, oh my God, Andrew Lloyd Webber is God.
Yes. And another thing, Aryeh, there's a long standing joke in this show that Mr. Sheffield hates Andrew Lloyd Webber.
That was so prominent that I kind of remembered that from seeing it as a kid, even though I didn't really know who Andrew Lloyd Webber was, when I was 11 years old watching the show.
Yes, and he's constantly bested by him.
Right.
Yes.
And so then, Mr. Sheffield's run off to beat Cece, and then Val is there, and she's like, Fran, do you think that maybe your mom was right, and God is punishing you for all that, for taking the Cantor away? And she's like, no, Mr. Sheffield's always mad at me. I'm always single. What's new? But then she looks at the mail and she goes, I miss the Loman's year-end clearance sale. She's like, why me, God? And you probably, so we've talked about Loman's on this show before. I'm very familiar with Loman's and the phenomenon that it is among East Coast Jewish women. Sean, I guess they didn't have them in Florida, but Aryeh, I'm assuming you knew Loman's from Jersey.
Yeah, I think I knew. It's sort of like Filene's Bargain Basement. kind of thing. I associate with that. I don't think I'd ever been to it myself, but knew sort of what it was. Yeah.
So yes, and as I've said on the show before, Loman's was kind of iconic for, at least in my like 8-year-old child's mind, for having communal dressing rooms. So like your mom would drag you in and it would just be all old ladies getting changed in front of you, and you're just horrible. But so then we cut to Temple. This is like wrapping up the episode. Fran and Sylvia walk in, like everyone's shooting them the evil eye, and they kind of like, like quietly sit in the back, trying not to be noticed. And, they're just like completely despondent at the state of things. And then Fran actually, she goes, Debbie Berkowitz got engaged? Who am I, Job? Because like this woman who clearly she hates at Temple, like has an engagement ring on. And Sylvia's so distraught that she's literally eating a BLT out of her bag.
Yes, eating the strips of bacon. That was a very funny side gag.
And then that's
another running gag. She's always eating.
Yeah, yes. Well, Fran then, is looking through her purse for like a napkin for Sylvia, and she pulls out the $500 check, and it kind of clicks for her because she's like, what did I do that was so bad? And she's like, like the airline scam. And she's like, this must be it. So she instantly shoots up from her chair and she runs over to the rabbi and she's like, donation to the temple. And she like gives it to him. And then no sooner does she do that, does she like sit back down, and Fran's mom has just heard this other woman at Temple's moving to Boca, which means that they now are going to get her seats for the high holidays. And then Debbie Berkowitz stands up and throws her ring at the guy and goes, the engagement is off, and like runs out. And then and like the rain stops, and Fran's like, wow, like he doesn't just work in mysterious ways. He works fast.
Yeah.
And so they're back on God's good side. And like that's the end of the episode.
I mean, the idea that like that woman, Debbie Berkowitz's engagement ending is like a victory for Fran is like a very funny idea in itself. Like, it's not like she wanted that guy. She just doesn't want, the rival to succeed at all.
Yes. Well, there's also lots of references to like how Fran would sabotage girls in competitions growing up. And it's like, is Fran really the hero in these stories? Like, that's horrible.
Fran might not be a girl's girl. She's looking out for herself.
Yeah.
Well, it's interesting because the episode also like the Niles story either acknowledges the existence of Christian God also, or that none of this is God and it's just like karmic.
Oh yes, that he stole from the offering plate when he was a child. Right?
Yeah, because he has a beat where she's like, "Oh my God, like we're cursed. Like this is because I did something wrong and I made God mad." And then he's like, "Well, once when I was younger, I stole from the offering plate and nothing bad happened to me." And then there's a beat and he goes, "Now, excuse me, I have to go wash someone else's underwear." Like, which is a very funny line.
It's even worse. It's I have to go wash other people's underwear.
Other people's underwear. Yes.
Yeah.
So, it's like a funny line, but it also is like, well, so, is the show saying that like, is the show advocating for God is real, or is the show just saying like, bad shit happens to,
I think it's perfectly ambiguous. It's supposed, it's ambiguous.
I mean, is there a vision of like ultimate justice within the nanny universe? Like,
I think there is.
If they're just desserts or not, like hard to say. I mean,
I want to believe there is
that character, and she doesn't get hit by a bus.
Right.
I would say there's definitely magical realism in the nanny universe.
Oh, for sure. Yeah.
Like if we're more than like like a central morality or like proof of God. But should we just move on? Should we move on to our favorite lines and moments? Because I feel like we're kind of bleeding into that already.
Yeah, we should. Let's move on to segments.
Okay.
And now segments.
So segments.
Yeah, no, I think we should move on to segments.
We can move on to our segments.
And now segments.
Segments with Sean and Toria. So the segment music will have played.
Yes.
Which I do want to write another one, but I know that's a lot of work for Sean.
Go for it.
No, I want you to write the new one.
You want me to do a new segment theme, guys. Okay.
But anyway, so we kind of were just touching on this is why I wanted to get into this, which is, I love the line where Niles claims that he once stole 5 shillings from the church donation plate and nothing happened to him, and now he has to go wash other people's underwear. But there was also this other Niles beat, which cracked me up, which is when Fran gets her check from the airline. He's like folding laundry and he's like, like, don't you think this could be construed as fraud, Miss Fine? And she's like, oh, I don't know, Mr. 14 dependents. And then he goes, yes, and it's so difficult supporting them all since I'm a student and everything. And then he goes, now get out of my home office.
Right, yeah, it's funny. Yeah, that it's sort of like everyone is like running their own little grift on the side.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
I like Sylvia. This was a beat that we skipped over, but I really loved Sylvia comes into the kitchen and she's all stressed out and she takes Brighton's food off of his plate. And she goes, now go play with your brother and the little one in the other room. And there's a beat where Brighton looks at her like, wait, what? And then he leaves. And then she turns to Fran and she goes, ugh, that haircut is awful on her. Implying she thought Brighton was Maggie.
Well, the whole thing is she's wearing sunglasses because she's refusing to take off her like incognito disguise. And she's like, I can see fine. And then she turns to Brighton and goes, go play with your brother.
Uses him for Maggie.
Yeah. Well, and we also have a great Sylvia beat where she claims she's so distraught she wants to die, but then pauses to take a bite of cake, which is very Sylvia.
Also, Fran says, if God listened to a word my mom said, I'd be living in a mansion with a millionaire and his kids. And she goes, oh, she forgot to wish that I was married.
Yeah. Yeah.
Which is a good one. What else?
Well, Sylvia screaming, Morty, take the gravy boat away from the rabbi, got me.
Yes.
Ari, was there anything that stood out to you? Good, bad, confounding?
I mean, I think the sort of like the visual gags or just the visual like details stood out, like that huge cigar and other things like that.
Yeah.
Struck me as like, oh yeah, this is weird. And yeah, I guess it's just more of the having not immersed myself in a 90s sitcom the way you guys have, just how broad it was and how like silly and goofy it was, and that is something that you don't, that has faded away from culture as well. Just like this level of, silliness and,
yes.
and like doing whatever for a gag.
I mean, I don't know that. I think all of the Tina Fey shows have that consistency to them.
That's true. Yeah, there's definitely. I mean, the cartoonishness of it, in like 30 Rock was sort of a like live action cartoon in a way, and
and the what was the one on Netflix? Kimmy Schmidt and Girls Five Eva on Peacock now is ridiculous, like a completely absurd show.
Okay, so we did some favorite lines and moments. I'll get us into trivia now. Okay, so this was interesting. IMBD listed this as a goof, which led me down another rabbit hole. So the goof was listed as Fran takes the money that she swindled from the airline and donates it to the temple in order to get back in God's good graces. However, gifting ill-gotten gains to the temple is an offense in itself under Jewish law, and an act, quote, abhorrent to the Lord would be unlikely to assuage his wrath.
Fair.
I did a little digging to be like, okay,
is this accurate?
Or
is IMDb up to it again?
This is in fact true. So it's in Jewish law, like from the Talmud, knowing where you're donating your money to is just as important as knowing where you're getting donated money from. And so it's really important to know it wasn't stolen or it wasn't attained from any, quote, ill-gotten means. And it even states that—
But you're saying it's also important to know that you're not donating it to like crappy people or—
Yes. Well, that's why I said it's like, it's that seems like the more intuitive one, like know where you're donating your money to, but it's also important to know who's donating money to you. And the Talmud even states that charity collectors can accept money from housewives, but only in small amounts. And the logic being that their husbands are really the ones are the ones in control of the finances. And so if it's more than a small amount, it might not actually have been approved by like the real owner of that money. That's how far this goes. There is a story in the Talmud where this kind of wise man and this younger man are going around from city to city and town to town collecting charity. And these really wealthy women are giving these like really lavish gold necklaces to to charity to them. And the younger guy goes, "Oh, I thought we're not supposed to take large amounts from housewives." And the older wise man goes, yes, but they're so rich that this is a small amount to them. Like, so it goes deep. But so theoretically, this ill-gotten money would not have fixed things or rectified Fran's situation with the Lord.
There's this, one of the few things that I learned in Hebrew school that I retained was there's a hierarchy of charitable giving within Judaism where an anonymous donation is more ethical. Like the worst form of charity is a rich person like handing money to a poor person, because then the rich person feels good about themselves and the poor person feels embarrassed. And there's gradations within this, and then like the anonymous leaving a donation where you don't know who gets it in the end, then that's like the purest ethical form, because you're not like feeling, you don't feel like you're putting yourself above someone, and no one knows that you did something great. And like Maimonides came up with this, so that maybe conflicts with with Fran handing over the $500 check as well,
and yelling about it to the whole temple. Wow. Well, then you would almost think the purest form would be you don't even know you're donating at all.
Yes.
But that's really interesting.
We should also note IMDb trivia points out that the exterior shot of the synagogue in this is a real synagogue from Flushing, Queens, where Fran is from. Mm-hmm. So that's pretty interesting. And then they also do mention that the title refers to the old Eddie Cantor show from radio.
We got it. I missed it, Sean. We did it. Okay, but normally
the screenshot of it.
yeah. Literally, RA, while we were recording, he sent me the screenshot of the Eddie Cantor trivia in IMDb, just in case I had missed it in the 5 minutes we talked about how I missed it. But also, normally we would do Yiddish. Interestingly enough, there was no Yiddish, but we did already discuss
a lot
Cantor.
of Hebrew.
We did a lot of Jewish stuff this episode, so I feel like it's okay that we don't have a Yiddish term.
We can't do too much, or they'll come for us. So.
And I would say I think we've done enough for a whole season of the Nanny podcast. So
we've hit our Jewish cap, so we won't be doing the Yiddish segment for the rest of the season.
But so this is, normally we close out the show doing who's the Fran, who's the Cece. Mm-hmm. But we always then like to turn it over to the guest. And if you felt like you resonated more with the Fran or the Cece in this episode.
In the sense of, say more.
This is a nonsensical game in the sense of Fran was involved in the A plot and did all of the things that she did this episode, and Cece royally screwed stuff up and was insulted multiple times. So who did you relate to more?
No, because it can be however you take it. Sometimes it'll be like, well, I've gotten screwed over financially, so I relate to this character more, or it can be, I often, feel ignored by a loved one. So I'm the CC in this. Like, it's really whatever. It can be very literal, or it can be very, like esoteric.
Okay, that's interesting. Yeah, I don't think I would never have the gumption to do a airport insurance scam to begin with, or to try to snag the hot new Cantor. So I didn't feel a particular connection to Fran's plotline here, and maybe Cece's various mistakes that resonated more with me.
See, and I'll say this week, I believe that I'm a Cantor Gary. So that's my answer. I'm Cantor Gary this week.
And then I am the rabbi that spills food everywhere.
Yeah, you are.
It's just a free for all. We're just going off the rails and we get to be anyone.
All right. But now we get to do something that we very rarely get to do on this show, because Tori and I don't do anything outside of this podcast. So let's do plugs. Tell us about your podcast a little bit, and give all the information that you need to give so that people can check it out.
Yes, thank you. So it's Culturally Determined. I've been doing it since 2015. It previously appeared on the Blogging Heads platform and is now independent. So you can find it on your, any podcasting app. And it also is on YouTube, but not on video, it's just the audio. And it is an interview show about politics and culture broadly, or culture and politics. And it's more or less whatever interests me. And so I do both high and low culture. So talking about the nanny is firmly within what I
I
talk
called her
about.
the highest.
But, other episodes have been about, Shakespeare and stuff like that. I did a recent episode with Dana Stevens from the film critic from Slate about her new biography of Buster Keaton. And maybe if viewers or listeners of this program would be interested in an episode I did last year, which was with the novelist Dara Horn about her new book, which has a very provocative title, People Love Dead Jews. And that was a very Jewy episode that I did. And we talked, and some of the things we talked about resonate with things from this episode. So people can check that one out, or the episode that I did with you guys, which is called, I think, Diving into the Nanny, and came out in May.
So and then for us guys, rate and review the show on all of the places. Apple Podcasts, 5-star reviews really help. Obviously, share it and talk about it and tell people to listen to it and get them to watch The Nanny. Just listen, do it like we did it, one episode at a time. Go on their podcast, ask them to return a favor, then get them to watch The Nanny with you. And if you want to reach out to us on Instagram or Twitter, you can do that on Oh Mr. Chef Pod, which is the name of our handles on both of those platforms. And as always, we'll see you next week for more episodes. I don't know what. As always, I was like, I don't have a sign off.
We like to go. We like to go goodbye, but then we also now like to go everybody out. Yeah. Not you, because they do that all the time on The Nanny. Yeah. One person who's in trouble tries to slink out with everybody else.
Yeah. So on that note, everybody out of here. Toria, not you.
Okay.
All right. Goodbye.
Bye.
Thanks, Arye.
Thank you.
The Flushing Girl from Flushing, the nanny named Fran.
Oh, Mr. Sheffield.
Miss Fine.